20 years later. This game is 20 years old now. I remember when I first got the game. It was Christmas 1998. My mom got me the game as a present, along with a strategy guide made by Versus Books. Such a great guide. I wonder what happened to these guys. Do they still make them? But yeah, 20 years. A lot has changed in gaming since then, but you can't deny that this game has set the foundations for many games to come after it was released. But what is it about Ocarina of Time that makes it so special? I played both the original and 3DS version for comparison, but this is more of a review in general of the game, as both versions are virtually identical. Although the 3DS version does have superior models, graphics, and runs at 30 frames per second as opposed to the N64's 20 frames per second, I'll be using a mix of both for the review depending on what's needed. First, let's start with the story. This time around we get narration from the Great Dooku Tree, which sets the tone well. We see Link as a young boy. Every child in the Kokiri Forest has a fairy. With that, we cut to a nightmare of Link's. A strange dream that is early foreshadowing as to what's to come. But Link comes across a dark man. But now the Great Dooku Tree asks that Navi the Fairy find this young boy and bring him to him. After a graphical showcase of, hey look, we're all on the Nintendo 64, Navi wakes Link up and your quest begins. Link is the outcast among the Kokiri, but he has one supporter in Saria. What's this on Link's house? Foreshadowing! But Mido, the ever-present bully, refuses to let Link see the Great Dooku Tree if he doesn't have a sword and shield. Most notably, Link actually speaks here. Really, what this sequence is meant to be used for is to get you used to the new controls. Kokiri Forest is so peaceful, so quiet, these are just kids having fun. It's a nice little lighthearted way to introduce you to the game. Speaking of those controls, what Ocarina of Time introduced is the Z-target maneuver. Navi will lock onto an object or an enemy, and Link will change to combat mode. You can sidestep, backflip, roll forward, all to give the sense of combat for fighting the enemy.
Link will swing his sword horizontally when he's not Z-targeting, and will swing it vertically when he is.
So with that, Link heads to the Dooku Tree, who is cursed and wants Link to break the curse. So thus, Link and Navi enter the Great Dooku Tree, which is our first dungeon. Well, it's a short dungeon as it's meant to introduce you to the mechanics of the game. The slingshot takes you into first-person view and allows Link to aim freely. The 3DS version has a gyroscope function built in, which allows you to aim with the gyroscope. The inside of the Dooku Tree has a foreboding, decaying feel to it, as it's inhabited by spiders and Dooku scrubs. Another item Link gets is the Dooku Sticks, which allows Link to burn up webs. This game was also the game that made opening treasure chests this big, dramatic thing. I love it. But it wasn't until I got to the first boss that my jaw truly dropped. Whoa, bosses didn't do this. Now, Goma is incredibly easy, and she's supposed to be. Once she's beaten, she disintegrates into dust. So epic, especially for its time. Link finds himself before the Great Dooku Tree and he gives Link the backstory of Hyrule. Here, Zelda's lore is massively expanded. We actually get to see the goddesses and their creation of Hyrule in the Triforce, and it's treated with absolute majesty and wonder. Unfortunately, your efforts were for naught. The Dooku tree is going to die, but he gives Link the spiritual stone of Forest and tells him to go see Princess Zelda. With that, Link's mentor and the one who introduced us to the mythos of Zelda dies. Before you leave, Link is paid a visit by Saria, who gives Link the fairy ocarina as a sign of their friendship. It's a nice, touching little moment. Then you get introduced to Hyrule Field. I must admit, by modern standards, it's empty and could use a little more life, but when I first saw this in 1998, I was blown away. Games had never done anything of this caliber. Then you have this owl named Gaboro, who acts as Link's mentor, who constantly asks you if you want him to repeat everything he said. No, thank you. So whatever the case, you get to Hyrule Castle Town, and it's a peaceful town filled with civilians, happily going about their daily lives. For Link, this is new. For you, you're seeing a level of interactivity that games never had before. Going to the castle, Link meets Zelda for the first time, and she tells him of Ganondorf, the King of Thieves, who very curiously manages to catch a glimpse of Link and Zelda. Zelda tells Link that the Sacred Realm can only be opened by he who holds all three spiritual stones. With that, you head out. You can visit Lon Lon Ranch, where Link can form a bond with his soon-to-be horsey Pona. Of course, a single worker named Ingo resents Talon, who is a lazy bum, while his daughter Malon takes care of the horses. It's also requested that you go visit Saria and learn her song. It's from a dear friend of Link's, so it has a sentimental value. Then going to Kakariko Village, where we see a small town. We then head up to Gordon City, where we meet Darunia. Link has to then take back to Dodongo's Cavern. The cavern is a nice atmospheric dungeon that requires Link to use bombs. Let me tell you something, I really love how with the N64 controller you can now select up to 3 items to be held at any time. 4 with the 3DS version, with the Ocarina having a dedicated button so it doesn't take up any inventory. It's a nice addition. King Dodongo is a pretty easy boss as it just involves throwing bombs into his mouth. I love the way he rolls around and expires at the end of the level. After that, Link goes up Death Mountain to meet the Great Fairy, who gives Link a magic meter. It was always so creepy whenever Link met one of these fairies. Just the way they laugh. Always sounded so evil. Heading to Zora's domain, it's a beautiful area, but the king's daughter is missing, so Link has to enter Jabu Jabu's belly to go save her. Before I do that, though, I must mention that I visited Lake Hylia. A beautiful lake, and I got so sidetracked by fishing. So much fun. Although, on the 3DS version, I had a noticeably tougher time fishing for some reason. Couldn't catch the right fish and it kept getting away. Little bugger. Inside Jabu Jabu is a short, fun little dungeon that introduces you to the boomerang. Oh, sweet boomerang, I love you! Of course, that means you have to drag Ruto around, and she can be a bit annoying. Fortunately, you don't have to deal with her too often. Once you beat the boss, which is another use the item you got in the dungeon to beat it, Ruto will give Link the spiritual stone, calling it the Zoro's engagement ring. You know, I wonder how this game would have fared. This was in the early days of the internet, when shipping was just starting to become a thing. Before I head back to the castle, there's a lot to do in Hyrule. There's a cursed family in Hyrule, and you have to destroy these gold Skulltulas to get a reward. For every 10 you destroy, you get a reward. One that takes advantage of the N64's Rumble Pack, and a piece of heart. Yeah, these are back, of course. You can get them hidden in the field by playing minigames. You can upgrade your equipment by playing these games or by doing side quests, such as giving a mask to this Skull Kid. There's a lot to do in Hyrule, but now it's time to return to Zelda. Unfortunately, Link's nightmare from the beginning of the game comes true as Zelda and Impa race past him on a horse. Zelda shows one heck of an arm as she throws the ocarina into the moat. But the real important scene is Link and Ganondorf's first canonical meeting. like about this is how Ganondorf is just kind of impressed by Link. I like you, kid. You've got guts. Link is even a little nervous, and I just love the ending of their confrontation. Link then gets the Ocarina of Time, and Zelda teaches him the Song of Time to get inside the Temple of Time. The townspeople continue to go about their daily lives, though they acknowledge what just happened, but if you go to the back alley, you come across a soldier who is wounded from Ganondorf's attack. When I was little, I never knew that this scene was in the game, only coming across it upon replaying it in 2007. It's a scene that not many people are aware exists, even today, but you do as he says and you go to the Temple of Time. I always wondered what exactly happened at the castle while Link was gathering the spiritual stones. It would make for an interesting video. Link opens the Door of Time. The sight is truly majestic. All is well until... That's when it hits you. You failed. You just opened the way for Ganondorf to take over. There's nothing you can do now. Link wakes up, meeting Rauru, who tells Link not to be alarmed. The Legend of Zelda is in many ways about a boy becoming a man, and that's taken quite literally in this game. Rauru gives Link his medallion and tells him that in order to seal Ganondorf away, he must find and awaken the 6 sages. Link is then met by Sheik, who is of ambiguous gender. Sheik tells Link that he must find the hookshot to enter the Forest Temple.
When you first step out of the Temple of Time, you're made aware that something is wrong.
That strange ring around Death Mountain being the key, which is sadly not as apparent in the 3DS version. The marketplace is filled with re-deads who always used to scare me when I was a kid. Hyrule Castle is no more. You can only gawk in horror as you see Ganon's castle. It's not just the marketplace that's affected. Kokiri Forest is now infested with monsters. Goron City is deserted, Zora's domain is frozen over, Lake Hylia has been drained of water, and Ingo's taken over Lon Lon Ranch. That fiend! Kakariko Village is where most of the townspeople have come to hide out due to evacuating. I guess Ganondorf lets them live in fear of his attack. So first thing I did was help out Talon and Malon, who tells them that Ingo will be cruel to the horses. You can get Epona back, and it's here that Link and Epona form their bond that will last throughout generations. Beating Ingo in a race is easy. Epona basically makes traveling across Hyrule much faster and easier, because let's be honest, when you're a kid, you're basically reduced to rolling across the field to get across much faster. Of course, telling Talon you've saved Malon leads to him becoming a new man, and Ingo is better now. Somehow. But hey, you restored peace to Lon Lon Ranch. It's a small step, but it's a start. In Kokiri Forest, you come across Mido, and you have to prove that you're a friend of Saria. This leads to another scene if you go back. Little subtlety. I like it. You get to the Sacred Groove and Saria is not there. A bit of a sense of a loss of innocence. Sheik appears and teaches Link a song to get back there quickly. This is basically all Sheik amounts to, just gives you warps. Now it's time to enter the Forest Temple. The Forest Temple is this strange and disorienting temple. It's the first adult dungeon. It's primarily about hunting down the 4 Poe sisters and then taking back their flame. The boss is a rather impressive Phantom Ganon boss fight, though it's pretty easy as you just play tennis. I do find it interesting that this is the only time that Ganondorf contacts Link directly. He acknowledges Link on some level. Gap between dimensions? That's like something out of the early Dragon Ball Z dub. Was this in the Japanese version? Link meets Saria again, and it's a somber note as they cannot exist in the same world together. So a new Dooku tree sprouts, and tells Link the truth of his lineage. His mother died entering the forest during a great war. The great Dooku tree then raised the child as a Kokiri as he knew he was a child of destiny.
I always thought this Link had the most interesting backstory of them all.
This growth frees the Kokiri forest of the monsters inhabiting it, so you've taken a little bit of the world back from Ganondorf. Now it's time to go to Goron City. You meet Darunia's son, who is named after Link. Actually, how do Gorons reproduce? I don't see any females. Never mind. Heading inside Death Mountain Crater,
Link enters the Fire Temple. I'm playing this off the original N64 version, which has a rather unique music to it.
You meet Darunia again, and he tells you to get the Goron special crop.
What really stands out to me about this dungeon is how terrified the Gorons are.
And it really sets out how evil Ganondorf is. The Megaton Hammer is a lot of fun too. Fighting Volvagia is really tense with the Z targeting. When I was a kid, this was absolutely intense to watch. Darunia awakens as a sage and it's time to go visit Zora's domain. You first have to do a mini dungeon, which was supposedly a part of what the actual dungeon was going to be. Just get blue fire, melt the red ice, and get the iron boost, which allows Link to sink underwater. Then we enter the Water Temple. Oh boy, the Water Temple. I have to admit, I did whip out the guide for this one. You absolutely need to make sure you get this block into position, otherwise your life will be hell. What makes this dungeon so annoying is that you have to constantly change the water level. You need to put on your iron boots to sink, which means constantly pausing the game, equipping the boots, unequipping them, and continually going around the Water Temple. Oy vey. Fortunately, this is made much easier than the 3DS version, as the boots are a button input. So this is one dungeon that the 3DS version noticeably improved. It does have another boss fight with Dark Link who will repeat your every move, but the trick is not to Z-target him. It's a rather interesting way to deal with him. So thus, with that beat, it's time to fight the boss. Morpha is a pretty standard boss, just make sure you don't get caught in his tentacles or it'll throw you around. Here's the new long shot to lure it in. I love this baby. So with that, you beat it, Gerudo awakens as a sage, and Lake Hylia is filled with water once again. Oh, and Zora's domain will, eventually, return to its normal state. I guess that's reassuring. In the N64 version, it was at this point I decided to do the big Goron side quest. It's just a fetch quest, but eventually you get timed, so you need to use Epona for this, otherwise you will not make it. Of course, as I entered Kakariko Village, a cutscene played that set the stage for the next dungeon. Sheik gets thrown aside like a ragdoll, which is the only time you see Sheik engage in any kind of fighting. I guess I have to head to the next dungeon. Oh, whoops, gotta take care of that first. The big Goron sword is the strongest sword in the game, but it's a two-handed blade so you can't use your shield. I personally find that a bit of a deal breaker as I've gotten older. I used to love the biggie, but now I like using my shield. Before we go to the next dungeon, it's recommended that you head back in time to access the bottom of the well. It was always so epic whenever you went back in time. In order to access the dungeon, you have to play the Song of Storms for the guy in the windmill, who also taught you the song in the first place. So if you learned it from him, and he learned it from you, then I've gone cross-eyed. The bottom of the well. This place terrified me when I was a kid. All I wanted to do was get the Lens of Truth and get out as fast as possible. It just looks so terrifying. It's like one big tomb, which I think is the intention. The Lens of Truth are needed for the Shadow Temple, which is yet another long tomb. Your goal is to awaken Impa as the Sage's Shadow. The part that sticks out to me is the part where you're on a boat, going to the final area of the dungeon. It keeps going and going and, wait a minute, is it sinking? Games don't do this! You get the hover boots in this dungeon, so yay, more boots to equip and unequip. The boss battle is against Bongo Bongo. What kind of demon name is Bongo Bongo? He's pretty easy. Impa awakens as a sage and it's now time to go to the final dungeon in the desert. Entering the Gerudo Fortress, they lock Link up for being a male. And now you have to sneak around the Gerudo Fortress and rescue the Carpenters. It's like Metal Gear Solid in some ways, which came out just a few months before this game did. You have to fight the Gerudos, but they have some one-hit knockout move. You just get thrown back into the cell, but they never think to take Link's equipment. Not sure why, but okay. So you rescue the Carpenters, get approved to walk around the Gerudo's fortress, and head into Desert Colossus. It's a pretty simple journey until you finally hit the Spirit Temple, only to find that you can't enter. You must go back in time as a child to get in. Sheik will teach you the song that allows you to warp back, and strangely enough, you do see Gabora Gabora for the only time in the adult half of Ocarina of Time. So the Spirit Temple is the only dungeon where you have to go through half the dungeon as a child and half as an adult. I always thought it was an interesting idea to have to switch between child and adult Link, but it's a bit underutilized in this game. You meet Neighboru, a thief who has no loyalty to Ganondorf, so you basically get through. But as child Link, you have weaker weapons and poor reach with the Kokiri sword, so it's a bit more challenging. After beating the Iron Knuckle, you get the Silver Gauntlets. But Link witnesses Neighboru being kidnapped by two witches.
Powerless to do anything, you must return to the future.
The Silver Gauntlets basically give Link more power, as he can move blocks that he couldn't before. You get the Mirror Shield in this dungeon, which allows Link to reflect light. It's pretty to the point. Before you enter the final boss portion, you must fight a possessed Neighboru as an Iron Knuckle. This part was always given away to me, because it's the scenes they showed you if you waited long enough at the demo. I always assumed Neighboru was teleported away before they could possess her again. The boss of the dungeon, Kihome and Kotoke, are said to be Ganondorf's surrogate mothers, which is rather interesting world building. You just have to reflect their attacks back at them, then they do a fusion dance into Twin Rova. She follows the same patterns, but you have to make sure you get 3 of the same element in order to damage her. Following an amusing scene where the witches argue over their age, Neighboru awakens as a sage, and it's time now for the final battle, but first we must head to the Temple of Time. Before we do that, let's get the last Skulltula. Everyone is now freed and you get 200 rupees? So, why did we do this exactly? Link arrives at the Temple of Time to find Sheik waiting for him. Sheik tells Link of a new legend. If someone with an imbalanced heart touches the Triforce, it will be split into 3 pieces. Ganondorf only kept the Triforce of Power, while Link himself received the Triforce of Courage. But the Triforce of Wisdom?
When I was a kid, my jaw dropped when I saw this for the first time.
The guide kept this a secret. Zelda tells Link that she's sorry for having to meet him in disguise. She couldn't predict that the Master Sword would seal Link away. The kids were basically in over their heads after all. Zelda gives Link the light arrows, which basically replace the silver arrows going forward. But then... I love this scene. It explains why Ganondorf let Link run around and didn't try to stop him. He's a cold, calculating villain. And now the stage is set for the final battle. So now it's time. You enter Ganon's castle. Disarming the 6 barriers to get inside the main portion, there's nothing much to it. You get the gold gauntlets at this part, and watching Link throw a huge piece of granite away like it's a piece of cardboard is so shocking when you first see it. With all the barriers deactivated, Link enters the main part of Ganon's tower. As you enter, all you hear is Ganondorf's theme playing as you climb the steps. It gets louder and louder, symbolizing how close you are to the end. When you reach the final door, you know it's time for the final battle. You take a deep breath and you head inside. The next scene is tense, and you see that Ganondorf was playing the organ while waiting for you. He's a man of class. But now it's time for the final battle. The fight against Ganondorf is not very challenging. It's just a game of tennis, but the build-up is more than worth it. A nice little touch is that you can see his cape becoming more tattered as you get closer to killing him. When you finally land the final blow, Ganondorf is unable to believe that a mere kid has been able to beat him. Zelda is freed, but Ganondorf tries to take Link and Zelda with him. Taking a cue from Metroid, you then have to escape the tower before it collapses. It's not very challenging. You make it out, and what are you doing, Navi? Are you trying to get caught in the explosion? It finally seems over, but a rumbling is heard, and what follows is one of the greatest scenes in video game history. Throughout the whole game, every boss had a subtitle. But this time, no subtitle. Just Ganon. That's all you need. Now, the boss itself is incredibly easy. Just stun him and hit his tail, but there's more to a boss than difficulty. Build up, atmosphere, scaling. This is something Ocarina of Time did very well. One of the things I love is hearing Zelda scream if Link gets hit. Just adds to the danger that these characters are in. I love how Ganon is basically one big silhouette in the N64 version. Nothing is more terrifying. Something I think the 3DS version did much worse. Once you get the Master Sword back, it's actually programmed to do the most damage to Ganon. So you finally weaken Ganon down, and it's time to deliver the final blow. Ganondorf is sealed away, and I got the sense that he was stuck in limbo, based on his expression. But he vows to exterminate Link and Zelda's descendants. Triumphant, Link and Zelda share one last moment together. But the mood is somber, as Zelda decides to send Link back in time so he can reclaim his lost childhood. Sure, she's sending him to get those years back, but she will never get them back. And that's Ocarina of Time. 20 years on, does it still hold up? I'd say yes, it does hold up. You can't deny the impact that this game had on gaming. It's a game about a boy becoming a man, a loss of childhood and innocence, but how that perseveres, and how a boy in green clothes and a princess of destiny overcame the king of evil. Seeing all the characters you met celebrate the end of Ganondorf really does add to the sense of joy you feel. You earned this. This is your victory. I'd recommend playing it on the 3DS if you can, but definitely play the N64 original if you can. Ocarina of Time really is that good. Hey, if you liked the video, please hit the subscribe, bell, and like button. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.